This bill needs a huge rethink.
My Lords, it pains me to find myself in disagreement with the noble Baroness Lady Burt of Solihull, with whom I have worked on another cause in your Lordship's House, and for whom I have the highest respect. And I know that she is motivated only by the highest considerations in bringing forward this bill. I would like to address, first of all, Clause 2, which hasn't, I think, been mentioned so far, and I wish to, so to speak, just summarise it and dispose of it, but I want to come back to it later, which is why I think it's worth mentioning. Clause 2 imposes a duty on employers to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. It is already the case that sexual harassment in the workplace can give rise to actions against employers, but there isn't a corresponding duty on their part to prevent it from happening. This clause, uncontroversially in my view, fills that gap, and that is what I think Clause 2 is aimed at doing. So that's absolutely fine. The meat of the bill is, so to speak, in Clause 1. And Clause 1 is an attempt to go beyond to respond to, in some ways, the events that occurred at the President's Club dinner some years ago, which, let me say straight away, were, in my opinion, wholly reprehensible and should not have been allowed to happen, and the people involved should have some form of redress. I believe they do have a form of redress, but not necessarily through the Equalities Act as it stands. Hence, Clause 1 coming forward to address those issues. I'm grateful to the noble Baroness Lady Burt for arranging a meeting for me with the Government Equalities Office, which is supporting this and this bill. And I'm grateful for a briefing also I've had from the Fawcett Society, a written briefing, in which they draw attention to the fact that 56% of women working in the hospitality sector experience sexual harassment. That is clearly unacceptable. The first question then to ask is, does Clause 1 do anything for them? What does it do for the people who served and were abused at the President's Club dinner? And I think it probably does nothing for them at all, because it specifically says that it applies to employees. Now, I know nothing about the President's Club dinner and the particular arrangements on that occasion, but I do know that in general it is the case that where large banquets and other events like that take place, even in hotels, the staff are normally supplied by a silver service agency, which does not employ them in the first place. I once had an office in the same corridor as a silver service agency, a very reputable firm that supplied staff to many events throughout London. But the office was occupied only by the owner of the business and his secretary. There were no other employees. The staff who were supplied to wait at table at such events were very often students, they were people like that, they were part of his contact list, and he would assemble these people as occasion required. They were contract workers. Now, Section 40 of the Equality Act defines employees, and generally speaking, the status of employee arises for someone who has a contract of employment. But a contract worker is not an employee, and in fact they are dealt with in a separate part of the Equality Act. So my first comment is that I do not think that Section 1 would have done anything at all for staff working at the President's Club dinner, nor would it do anything for other people in similar circumstances, because large numbers of people in the hospitality sector are in fact not employed, but are in employed status, but are in fact contract workers. So the bill doesn't even, it seems to me, do what it sets out and what it intends to do. The second thing is, again taking the President's Club dinner as the starting point, is that it chooses to go way beyond sexual harassment. Clause 2 is about sexual harassment, but isn't pertinent to the President's Club dinner. Clause 1 defines the harassment simply as harassment. It doesn't say sexual harassment. But if you look at Clause 26 of the Equality Act, you will see that harassment is there defined, and it covers all relevant protected characteristics. So the bill goes way beyond sexual harassment, as my noble friend, I think Lord Strathcarron, mentioned, and would concern all of the religion and so forth, the other protected characteristics in the bill. And this seems to me an overreach and a misfiring of the bill, which could be so much better targeted on the evil that it intends to address. This brings us then, of course, to the freedom of speech problems. Because the net has been cast so wide and covers all protected characteristics, the problems that my noble friend Lord Strathcarron instantiated in relation to his own experience as a modest publisher and as a trustee, I think, of a museum, immediately arise. Because in places with large numbers of persons having access, the policies that will need to be put in place will need to be very in the face of those who are likely to have access to such an event. I don't know what they're going to consist of, but they have to be, and this is another important point, all reasonable steps. The Fawcett Society brief says that employers will be required to take reasonable steps. That is not what the bill says. It says all reasonable steps. And there is a world of difference in law, I understand, between reasonable steps and all reasonable steps. Because a small business, which might take reasonable steps that it can see for itself, but fails to take other steps that perhaps larger businesses are taking, perhaps it's not even aware that those larger businesses are taking those steps. A small business that doesn't take those additional steps would be found to have failed to have taken all reasonable steps. At the very least, they should be required to do what the Fawcett Society thinks they're doing and take reasonable steps, and the word all has to be removed, in my view. Then we come, and here I'm now slightly repeating a point made by my noble friend Lord Strathcarron, we come to the question of the defence inserted in the Commons in subsections 1C and 1D. The meat of it is in 1C. And in 1C, we find 4 conditions that have to be met before that particular clause can be prayed in aid by an employer. And as drafted, all 4 of those conditions have to be met. And I'm not going to read them out because noble lords have them in front of them at the moment and they're quite easily read. But they are each of them quite onerous in themselves and cumulatively will barely be available to employers when they come to an employment tribunal if they do. All this will do is result in more and more policies and more compliance culture as employers attempt to protect themselves from being sued, because, of course, their objective is to avoid ending up in an employment tribunal in the first place rather than to have a defence when they get there. And that's completely understandable. Finally, my last point is more a query, because I'm doing my very best on this. The noble Baroness, Lady Burt of Solihull, said that there would be a statutory code of conduct issued by the Equality and Human Rights Commission which would show how the bill would work. And I can't find it in the bill. I can't find a basis in the bill for such a code of conduct. But I look at the library notes produced by our own library here in the House of Lords, and it says, indeed, as the noble Baroness has said, that there will be a statutory code of conduct, and this is referred to in the explanatory notes. But look though I might in the explanatory notes, I can't find that either. But then I note that the library note says that this puts this remark about the explanatory, about the statutory code, under its explication of Clause 2. So possibly it means there is to be a statutory code of conduct in relation to Clause 2. And that would be absolutely fine. I'd come back to Clause 2, as I said I would. That would be absolutely fine, because I regard Clause 2 as uncontroversial, and supporting it with a statutory code of conduct seems to me a sensible step. But where is the evidence that there is going to be a statutory code of conduct in relation to Clause 1, which is the one that is causing us so much difficulty? Moreover, and this I think is a point of considerable concern, moreover, even if we find that there is to be such a statutory code of conduct, and my noble friend the Minister might be able to give an assurance and explain what its statutory basis is, we are in effect outsourcing to the Commission most of the substance of the operation of this clause that we're being asked to approve today. And I think that's rather troublesome. So I have the impression, I don't say, as my noble friend did, that this piece of legislation has been rushed. I don't know whether it's been rushed or not. But I do think it is ill thought out. I do think it misses the point. It doesn't do anything for the people it is trying to help. And it creates difficulties in other areas. My own view is that it would be sensible if it were withdrawn and rethought. But otherwise, I think it will have to be amended in committee.